Here's where I say something clever, and now you roll the music. I don't know how I orbit around Hazard County, but somehow Travis Bell, for years, was the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard. During this obsession of the television show and cars flying and things going on, I realized that the first 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard were filmed in Georgia, and you can still visit the sites. It pretty much is all still there, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, it really still looked the same. Because granted, the show had filmed down here in 78. So we would come down from Indianapolis and just bang around and drive General Lee's around and go play the Dukes of Hazzard. And of course, down here, and they're like, hey, it's Bo and Luke. And we're like, hey, nothing to see here. But then we wanted to find the people that worked on the show. And we would actually make these little beautiful flyers with a wanted poster that says, if you were here this day when the car flew, call this number or whatever else. And we put them in little diners, and where the cars flew, there's obviously telephone poles and stuff. We'd take this 20-foot ladder and put this sign up. It says, if you were here on this day, blah, 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 when the car flew. And people would call. They said, yes, they held the school bus up that day just to jump the car down the street. And Mom and Dad were so mad because I was late from school. And they had all these great stories. And then we started finding the people that painted the cars in and around Conyers, Georgia, and Covington and Snailville, Georgia, and all these other places. And then we found the transportation directors. And then we're like going, oh, now we got these gold mine people. And we had this fellow's name. His name was Don Schischler. And Don Schischler has won Academy Awards, and he was a director and second unit DP. And he had no reason to be nice to me. I was just some idiot that was obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard. And I pull into this lot where all these camera cars are, and there's these little bitty short buses, yellow school buses, and a bunch of blue Ford Tauruses. And some had the front end knocked off of them. One had all 4 wheels off of them. And I was like, what on God's green earth? And he's come out and introduced him. I said, all these? He said, movie Road Trip, Sean William Scott, whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, these are all the Tauruses from Road Trip. There's the short buses. We got to go crush all these things and get paid for these things. I'm like, this guy's awesome. And I go, tell me about the Dukes of Hazzard. Tell me about all this stuff. And he said, well, December 23rd, 1978, I had 51 totaled vehicles after 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard. And I go, what did you do with them all? He said, there's a transmission recycling shop in Dawsonville, Georgia, and his name is Shaw Recycling. And I called Cliff Shaw 2 days before Christmas, 1978, and he came and picked them all up. I said, all of them? He said, all of them. I'm like, well, when was the last time you talked to Cliff Shaw? He said, the 23rd of December, 1978. And I go, it's time for a family reunion. Like, let's go. So sure enough, as if this guy hasn't been entertaining enough to this idiot that's obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard, after Don Schischler had driven around all these Wagon Queen family trucksters from National Lampoons, he had this terrible black Suburban with a gun turret on the roof of it. And it was from some terrible, terrible Cindy Crawford, Baldwin brother bad guy movie. And this was the Russians of the bad guy car. But that was his car now. So we all get in the terrorist Suburban and head off toward Dawsonville, Georgia. And he's telling us this story that Cliff Shaw and the Shaw family live in this beautiful part of Dawsonville, Georgia, just down the street from Bill Elliott's shop. But there's a nuclear locomotive buried there. And they're the only ones that live on this street. It's either a nuclear plane or a nuclear locomotive, but it is buried at the end of Lumpkin Campground Road in Dawsonville, Georgia, and there's not very many people that live there because of this thing. And I'm like thinking, where on God's green earth is he taking us to? And he knew right where he lived. So we pull up down this hill or down this country road. I mean, you can imagine it in your mind. And up to the left was this gravel road that went up the hill toward this smaller home, but there was cars everywhere as far as the eye could see, all the way up the hill. And from make and model you can think of, older, but just what mythical junkyards are made of, and just trees growing up through them and everything. We're just looking for any remnants of the Dukes of Hazzard. We bang on the door up there. The lady comes to the door and says, hey, Cliff Shaw, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Cliff's not home from work yet. And hey, Don Schischler. And Don, on the way there, he said, look, I'm going to run traffic for you if they say it's here and you just go walking in their yard to see if you can find this thing. We're talking acres. I decided to chime in and say, hey, we're looking for things from the Dukes of Hazzard of all things. Remember Mr. Schischler here? He was a little family reunion there. And she goes, you looking for the old Dodge Charger car? And I'm like, she could have said a bad guy car. She could have said police car. She could have said Boss Hogg's Cadillac. She could have said anything. But yes, we are looking for the old Dodge Charger car. And she goes, if you walk back down the driveway at the second Pinto, mind you, not the first one, hang a left and start walking in toward the road. And I turned on a video camera, and there is a green 1969 Dodge Charger. And in the first episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, they jumped Lee 1 over Roscoe's police car. And of course, it didn't land well, but the body shop would remove the doors off of it because that kept them from having to paint new 01s on another car. And they remove everything that they can use, but then another episode of the Dukes of Hazzard called for a wrecked race car. So they repainted the first General Lee green and put 71s on it and put John Merende on the roof, which was the transportation coordinator. So I had just found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. As I walk around and the door was welded shut on one side and gone on the other side, and it's orange where the door jamb is, and the roll cage is still mostly in it. There's a VIN number, which is XP29, blah, 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 any Dodge Charger. And there's a little bitty, label maker. It says LEE1. And then I knew I had found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard with a Los Angeles parking sticker still on it and all these other things. What do? You are the biggest Dukes of Hazzard moron from any zip code you can come up with. So old Cliff comes home. I heard him drive past me up the driveway, and I'm down there trying to keep my tongue in my mouth going. And this thing is a disaster. It's got more pine needles on it than any national forest you can think of. The motor's in it, the transmission's in it somehow. And it's, still orange where it's supposed to be. It still has a 71. You open up the trunk, and it still has all the concrete in the trunk from when they jumped the car, because it was a big block car, and they jacked it up in the middle of the car, and of course the nose would be heavy, so they put Quikrete concrete in it until it leveled out, and that's how they made ballast in the back of the car. And that's how they flew the General Lees, and that's why they don't land nose first. So I go walking up the driveway, and I just can't believe, of all things, I expected a bad guy car, cooter truck, anything but the General Lee. I found the first General Lee. So Cliff was interesting. He was a very good old boy, super nice gentleman. I said, hey, Cliff, the old Dodge Charger, the green one down the street. He goes, oh, the General Lee. I'm like, oh, man. When he's thinking that's just some old wrecked race car. He knew it was the General Lee. I'm like, dang. And he goes, oh, the two Roscoe police cars were over the hill. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Sure enough, over the hill, past the goats, Roscoe, both police cars, police 1 and 2 sitting there. I come back up, and it was getting a little dark out, and Don had his family reunion with him. He had ran the traffic like he said he was going to for me. And I said, hey, generally for sale? Like, can I take all these out of here? No, the grandson, Cliff's grandson, was into the Dukes of Hazzard. And I'm like going, yeah, but this is it is a mess. And I said, well, all right, no amount of money. And it's, Travis, you have yourself a safe drive home now, whatever. And so I knew his grandson's name, and I knew his address. So I went home and started a little plan on how on God's green earth to get this car. So every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, I would send his grandson something in the mail. Little 3-pack of General Lee cars, Roscoe Cooter, Enos car, whatever else. Sent it in the mail. An autographed picture from John Schneider. Sent it in the mail. I'd place a call about every 6 months, and I'd say, oh, we sure do appreciate you sending. Zach, sir, loves this, and blase that, and no problem. So after, model kits, and I just put them in the mail. I called his wife one Friday, and I said, hey, did Zach get the Daisy Jeep thing or whatever? And she said, oh, yeah, we sure do appreciate it. He's in there putting it together now, or XYZ. Finally had enough. After about 8-10 months, a year of doing this, it's time to ask if we can buy the car again. And so I said, hey, I sure would like to come down and talk to Cliff about that car. Oh yeah, it's if you're ever in the area, you should come on down, stop on by. And that is my green light that someone has approved me to come down there and talk about that car. And so I immediately called friends in South Carolina, and they had a flatbed roll-off truck, and they didn't live far away. And I had another friend in Chicago. I didn't have a trailer at the time, and I said, I don't care what it takes, just get down here. And this was a Friday, and Friday turned into driving all day and night. Saturday, we pull down Lumpkin Campground Road, or where the nuclear locomotive is, and here comes Mr. Shaw down the driveway in an Astro van. And this driveway, of course, is up the hill, and it's gravel, and nothing stops well on gravel. It comes to a stop. And I said, hey, Cliff. Hey, June. I'm here to talk to you about this car. And Cliff turned into some guy I didn't know. And I yelled at me like I was his child. And I don't work on Sundays. Who told you to come down here? And I said, well, June just told me on Friday to come down. And she's like, yeah, and he's a very religious man, doesn't work on Sundays, not going to have anything to do with some Yankee down there cruising around his property. And I said, well, Cliff, I drove all night, and I really want to talk to you about this car. And he rolled the windows up, and he said, it's buried back there. You can see what you can do. And that was my green light. He didn't know I had a tow truck around the corner. So we moved a whole bunch of cars, and it was raining, and it was on the hill, and it was not good. And we pulled Lee one up on a flatbed with big old railroad ties and got it up there and got it out and parked it there at the bottom of his driveway. And it took hours, but he was at church. I saw him coming back down the road, and I don't know if he's going to tell me to fly a kite, get this thing out of here. What are you doing on my property? And he drove right past us and up the driveway. And I'm like going, oh, Mr. Shaw is pissed off. So everybody's looking at me like, what are you going to do? You got to go talk to him, Travis. I'm like, dude, this guy's... all right. So here he comes down overalls, and he said, Travis, I apologize for being so ill towards you today. The NASCAR race is on. Why don't you come up here and sit down and watch this with me, and we'll talk about that car. And he must have got some religion at church, felt bad about it. And I was like going, all right. So I'm like, Mr. Shaw said, let's go watch a NASCAR race. And we get up there, and an outside TV and old box TV and a little picnic table. After watching a couple laps of this race, I was like, Cliff, I got a heck of a drive home. I said, I want to talk to you about what I'm going to give you for this car. He said, well, what do you offer me for it? Being the shrewd negotiator that I am, I handed him a pen, and I said, you write a number on your hand, and I'm going to write a number on my hand. And we're going to turn them over, and whatever we're apart, then we know where we're going to start at. And so I had three eyes looking over my shoulder on what I was going to write on my hand. And Mr. Shaw, he didn't even think about it. So I wrote $300 on my hand. He could have told him what $30,000 for the car. I had no idea. He rolled his hand over. I rolled my hand over. He wrote $500 on his hand. So I bought the very first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard for $400. And then he said, you can have the other police cars for the same money too. So we're talking $1,200 for all of the three original police cars from the Dukes of Hazzard. So we took it home. We kept it in its green paint with the 71s, and it was known on the TV show as the Richard Petty wrecked race car. And we kept it like that for a long time. But people started picking paint off of it because they wanted a souvenir from the first General Lee. Or picking the roll bar padding. You couldn't take it anywhere because it's painted with lead paint. And Dukes of Hazzard fans letting their kids climb in this thing, and three of them's probably dead now from being inside that thing. So it was a mess. It was very, very bad. And I had 4 Dukes collectors from Ohio contact me and said, Travis, would you sell the first General Lee? I said, everything's for sale. What would you like? And they made me a good offer. I split the money, true to form, and a man was my word. With my friend from Chicago, he drove a trailer down there and made half. It was no longer my car, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Then another gentleman called and said, Travis, I'm in the market for a General Lee because for some reason the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard was in Indianapolis, and my name was all over every message board, and I had found the first General Lee, and I was arranging all this stuff, but he wanted a real car. And I said, man, there were 17 real General Lees left in the world. They're all in various conditions. They're very expensive. They're very impossible to drive because this is, if you want something to drive and go to your car shows, don't buy it. But he was adamant. About the same time, the guys from Ohio called back and said they'd broken up or whatever and they want to sell the car again. So I called the gentleman in Florida that wanted a real General Lee, and I said, Lee 1's for sale. And he said, give me the phone number. And he called me back. He said, I bought it. They'll have it ready for you. I've already wired their money. You just go to Ohio and pick it up. And I go, I don't want this car back. I mean, what? So he flew in from Florida. I went and picked the car up. We met at the Indianapolis International Airport. He came and saw what he purchased, which wasn't the greatest car in the world. It still looked exactly as it did as I found it in Cliff Shaw's yard. And I said, well, what are you going to do with this thing? He said, well, you're going to restore it. And I said, I have no desire to restore this thing. He said, Travis, if someone painted all over the Mona Lisa, someone would have to fix it, and that someone is you. And I'm like, that's pretty heavy. He took off. His plane ticket was for about 3 hours in Indianapolis to talk me into restoring the first General Lee. This car had fallen out of the sky and landed on asphalt 8,310 days before I found it. The transmission tunnel had caved over the top of itself. It was a disaster, but it still had its transmission, still had its motor, still had a lot of stuff in it. So I started writing checks, and we hired a body shop, found a completely junk but good sheet metal 69 Dodge Charger, saved what we could save off the other one. We actually had the original motor rebuilt. And then we restored Lee 1, but we didn't restore it to showroom condition. We restored it to as it appeared Saturday, November 11th, 1978, when it flew. And the decals were crooked because whoever put the decals on the door that day put them on crooked because they followed the wrong line of the car. And so we went ahead and rebuilt the car. And it ran and it drove and it still had a cracked windshield, and it had a cracked windshield in the show, and the parking sticker was in it. And we had General Lee number 1, again, on the road. The most famous car. It's on every Ertl package of it in the air. It's the only one that had chrome rocker panels for the entire show, and it's there. So we had the car, and we had it for a while. He took it back to Florida for a minute and put it in the DuPont Registry Museum down there, and just really kind of fell out of love with it. So it was time to sell it. He asked if we would represent the car again, which, we have no problem with that, and take it to Barrett-Jackson. And for those of you that have had an experience at Barrett-Jackson, oh boy. And it's going to run up on Saturday on the big night and everything else and whatever else. So my friend Jim went out there to represent the car. And he is, if not equally more knowledgeable about the Dukes of Hazzard than I am. And just a walking encyclopedia. I've learned more from him than I learned from most people that appeared on the show. He's out there representing the car, and I had to DJ. So now, when I say I had to DJ, I worked at a club called Boogie Nights for 9 years. I was a disc jockey for 26. So I have a full afro on, glasses, a Harlem Globetrotters uniform, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm looking at about 1,000 people, and I got this little TV in the DJ booth, and this car is about ready to sell. And he had called me, Jim had called me and said, there's this little guy, well-dressed, nice guy, really interested in this car. And I'm like going, I'll sell it to him, I don't care who he is. It's just, all we need is 2 people to get a bidding war on this thing. It rolls up on stage and it starts flying, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000. And this is a disc jockey and a luthier that had just restored a car, and we're up over $100,000. We have no business restoring cars. We are just Dukes of Hazzard fans. The minute it hit $110,000, it hit a wall. It was done. And they are begging for bids, like, somebody give me $10. Like, it was ridiculous. But there was a bid from the Skybox, and that Skybox was the eventual winner. And the minute he put his card up, everybody stopped. And they all got out of his way, and it was so weird to watch it happen. But I bought the car for $400, so I'm up to $110,000 on my $400 investment. Come to find out, it was Bubba Watson, and he does live in Scottsdale, and he's local, but a super nice guy, PGA golfer, just a terrific, terrific guy. And it couldn't have gone to a better person. A lot of people are like, Travis, aren't you upset this thing only went for whatever, and it was on a rails? I'm a disc jockey. and a disc jockey and a luthier restored the first General Lee, and we're fans, and we just made, the car just sold for $110,000 on my $400 investment. I was dancing in the dance club like the Warner Brothers frog, like I was happy as could be. When the car left and went on, Bubba would email me back and forth just occasionally, and I sent him some videos of when we restored it and shirts and whatever else. But then he would appear on a YouTube channel or another program, and he was able to recite the history of the car. So he was a student of the car, so it couldn't have gone to a better person. And he has since restored some things or done some things to make it his car, because it is now his car, and he is allowed to do anything he wants to with it. So some things I didn't expect was the backlash from the Dukes of Hazzard fans that couldn't believe that I would destroy the first General Lee, that I was going to cut this car all up and rebody it, and it's a replica of the first General Lee, and it's no longer the first car. And I was like going, but it's running and driving on the drivetrain it flew on, and all the sheet metal on it's 1969 sheet metal. So I restored the car, but it's a replica. And so I didn't, and there was just threads and just people pissed off. And I'm like going, oh my gosh. So you remember back in the day, the Statue of Liberty had all the scaffolding all over it. They rebodied the whole Statue of Liberty, but they still call it the Statue of Liberty. So even if you restore it, it's still the same thing. We just destroyed Hollywood history, but it was my $400 investment, and they could have bought it for the same amount of money if they would have found it.
Shrewd negotiation starts with finding the right car, and the best way to do that is with Autotempest.com. Autotempest allows you to search nationally through all the major listing sites with one search. Autotempest, all the cars, one search.